Deutsche Bank on the brink of collapse. Tough times ahead, prepare yourself accordingly. Bad news could spark a sell-off contagion that could lead to another global financial meltdown and a bailout by Angela Merkel's government despite her opposition to German state intervention. Analysts are warning that ultra-high-frequency trades triggered by machines could lead to a perfect storm and could have serious knock-on effects for other banks exposed to the firm's risky assets book. Germany's largest lender has been hit by unprecedented sell-offs, losing 52% of its value in just a year and is struggling to ward off its crisis. The bank has announced massive job cuts ahead of a £11.4 billion fine from the US Justice Department. And it has been mooted that up to 5,000 jobs could go in America alone. Now investors, including their biggest stakeholder Qatar, are said to be on edge as they get set to reveal their latest financial data. Deutsche Bank AG on Thursday posted an unexpected profit and set aside more cash to cover litigation costs amid talks aimed at settling mortgage securities probes with U.S. authorities. Third-quarter net income was €278 million, $303.1 million, beating analysts' average expectations for a net loss of around €610 million. That compared with a net loss of €6 billion during the same period last year, driven by billions of dollars in write-downs as part of a company-wide restructuring. In the latest stunning development involving a documented failure of a bank to deliver physical gold when demanded, yesterday we reported that according to German website godmode-trader.de, a client of the Xetra Gold exchange-traded commodity was told the fund's designated sponsor, Deutsche Bank, would be unable to deliver the requested gold. This was contrary to the explicit reps and warranties made explicitly in the Xetra Gold's prospectus, which said that investors are entitled to the delivery of the certified amount of physical gold at any time, and proudly added that since the introduction of Xetra Gold in 2007, investors have exercised this right 900 times, with a total of 4.5 tons of gold delivered. As the German article concluded, anyone who wants to easily convert their Xetra Gold holdings into physical gold, at least for clients of Deutsche Bank, can do so only by selling their shares, and then buying gold coins or bars directly elsewhere. Which leads the author to the logical question, what is the worth of the Xetra Gold service, which certifies the right to redeem physical gold, if said delivery is no longer possible? In other words, what was supposedly an ETC which promised physical delivery upon demand, is nothing more than yet another paper-only play. We asked another, more nuanced question, is the inability to deliver physical gold an issue with Xetra Gold, or with the company's designated sponsor, Deutsche Bank, and if the latter is suddenly unable to satisfy even the smallest of delivery requests by retail clients, just how pervasive is the global physical gold shortage? Our report has stirred a significant response, both at Deutsche Bank and at Xetra Gold, which today filed an official response, one which can be read in German on the following page. What is notable is that instead of immediately refuting the story as it should have done if there is no breach of prospectus covenants and declaring that any and all physical gold demands have and will be satisfied, Xetra took a very circular approach to responding, one which in effect confirmed our concerns, that the issue was not so much with Xetra, but with the sponsor bank, in this case Deutsche Bank. Gold Bank Investment Commodity Physical Gold Trade Trader Germany Deutsche Bank Vault Gold Vault Frankfurt Account Bank Account Umicore Gram Silver Gold Bullion Silver Coin 999 Gold 999 Silver Savings Account Binary Trading Sell Gold Cash for Gold Buy Gold Asset Rich Wealth Millionaire Billionaire UK London New York Delivery Shipping Elite NWO Agenda Economy News Media Entertainment Future Prophet George Soros Jim Rogers Alex Jones Coast to Coast David Icke Exposed Truth Prepared CAD Motograph Clients of Germany's biggest bank who have invested in the exchange-traded commodity Xetra Gold are facing problems when they want to obtain physical gold, according to German analytic website godmode-trader.de. Xetra Gold is a bond on the Deutsche Börse commodities market, and Deutsche Bank is a designated sponsor. On the website, Xetra Gold says its clients have the right for physical delivery of gold. Surviving an economic crisis is one thing, thriving and securing your wealth during it is a totally different game. Fortunately, I had already done my research on that. So we put our knowledge together and created an economic disaster survival blueprint for our families that would handle both survival and wealth protection. And we knew we had to warn unsuspecting Americans of what is coming and share this vital knowledge with them. This is how surviving the final bubble was born, a blueprint to surviving and thriving during the coming big bank derivatives collapse.
Special Reports is a daily show that will cover issues surrounding the economic collapse. All our reports and daily alert news are backed up by source links. We work very hard to bring you the facts, and we research everything before presenting the report. Subscribe for latest on financial crisis, oil price, global economic collapse, dollar collapse, gold, silver, Bitcoin, global reset, new world order, economic collapse, economic news, political, geopolitical news. Today, we talk about global currency reset, the end of the dollar. In January, Chinese President Hu Jintao went and dined with a lavish state banquet at the White House and other official ceremonies usually reserved for America's closest friends and allies. Why? One must be very polite when entertaining your banker even if you don't like him and he doesn't like you. Yet there is another more ominous, but closely related reason. For years, China has warned America that its support for the dollar was not unconditional. The warnings fell on deaf ears. Confident that China was virtually forced to lend money to America, Washington embraced a borrow and spend policy that would have destroyed any other currency. Then last year, when it became clear that America could not borrow enough money to pay the bills, it crossed the Rubicon, declaring that the laws of paper money no longer applied to the mighty dollar. America would just print whatever money it needed to pay the bills. Federal Reserve Chairman Benjamin Bernanke declared he would start by conjuring $900 billion, 75% of America's borrowing needs, out of thin air. The world was shocked that America would so abuse the world's reserve currency. France, Germany, Russia and China were outraged. But Americans wagered that the world is too caught in the dollar trap to do anything about it. So far, this strategy has worked out pretty well for America. With several European countries falling apart, the dollar has firmed up, and safe haven money has continued to flow into America. But signs are that is beginning to change. Europe's sugar daddy. As the Washington Post wrote, strange things are happening in Europe, none stranger than the emergence of China as the continent's sugar daddy. Wait, wasn't China America's sugar daddy? Well, just follow the yen. In July 2009, China held $939 billion worth of U.S. Treasury debt. More than a year later, China's holdings have fallen to $895 billion. This is big news and surely isn't lost on Washington. For more than a year, America's most important creditor has stopped lending new money to America. Instead, China is investing its money, and its confidence, in Europe. Today, Europe matters more to China than any place in the world. With 400 million first-world consumers and the world's largest economy, the European Union is by far China's biggest export market. It is a reciprocal relationship, too. China now directly holds over $900 billion worth of Eurozone national debt. In Greece, China is investing billions more as it attempts to build the Mediterranean port city of Piraeus into the Rotterdam of the South, and create a modern-day Silk Road linking Chinese factories with consumers across Europe and North Africa. Most importantly, China has thrown its weight behind the euro. In a recent trip to Europe, Vice Premier Li Keqiang did nothing less than transform Europe's economic picture. Just as commentators were predicting the collapse of the Eurozone, Li, a favorite to become China's next prime minister, appeared to throw China's $2.85 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserves into Europe's breach, promising to be a committed and responsible long-term investor in Europe. ICP Bank, China's largest lender, quickly followed suit, announcing its intention to move full force into the Eurozone. It will open its first-ever branches in France, Spain, Italy, Belgium and the Netherlands. It has already opened offices in Frankfurt and Luxembourg. Li's support is already paying dividends in Europe. With interest rates coming down from recent highs and successful debt auctions, Spain and Portugal got a welcome taste of what several billion euros worth of Chinese sugar can do. Of course, it doesn't come free. Li publicized China's desire that the EU relax restrictions on high-tech exports to China and develop trade relations. In addition, China wants access to Europe's defense companies. Europe seems all too willing to do business. The EU's Foreign Minister Catherine Ashton called for abolishing Europe's arms embargo with China. Reportedly, American officials, who have to deal with the rapidly growing Chinese military presence in the Pacific, are furious. What will replace the dollar? It was what Hu Jintao told the Wall Street Journal just prior to his arrival in Washington. However, that should have all Americans preparing for one massive sugar crash. He said the dollar should no longer be the world's reserve currency. It is a product of the past, he said. It is time for a more fair and balanced system. What does China think should replace the dollar? Hu himself said it wouldn't be the yuan. What does that leave? Follow the sugar. The euro will overcome the region's deficit crisis, assured Song Zhe, China's ambassador to Europe, back in December. The cementing of the euro's status will promote the building of a diversified global currency system, he said. Remember, when anyone talks about diversifying the global currency system, by definition it means ditching the current system, which is the dollar. And China isn't alone in shifting support to the eurozone. Japan has also announced that it will step up its efforts to back Europe by purchasing eurozone debt. According to Reuters, Japan will purchase 20% of soon-to-be-issued Eurobonds. The Eurobonds would be jointly issued and backed by all members of the eurozone, creating a new debt market that will directly compete with U.S. Treasuries. Where will Japan get the money? As America's second most important lender, it has a whole stack of treasuries it would probably love to diversify out of. If the world wants out of the US dollar, there is only one viable paper alternative, Europe. According to Li Daokui, an academic member of the Chinese Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee, Americans only have months to prepare while Europe works to get its act together. For now, market attention is still on Europe, and for the coming 6 to 12 months, it will not shift to the United States, said Li on December 8. But we should be clear in our minds that the fiscal situation in the United States is much worse than in Europe. In 1 or 2 years, when the European debt situation stabilizes, attention of financial markets will definitely shift to the United States. At that time, U.S. Treasury bonds and the dollar will experience considerable declines. Strange things are happening in Europe. Now you know why. The international monetary system set up at Bretton Woods in 1944 is on the verge of breaking down, and the dollar will soon be fighting for its survival as the world's reserve currency. The end of the dollar standard. I find myself in the strange situation of cheering Donald Trump's nascent program of economic renewal for the U.S., while worrying deeply about the domino effect that may topple a dollar-based global financial system whose health has relied greatly on benign neglect by the United States. The good news is that since the fall of the Berlin Wall I have never seen a president or prime minister of the right come into power with an agenda that so squarely opposes the doxa of left-leaning elitist circles. Whether in education, regulation, taxes, ecology, energy production, culture, justice, military strategy or national security, most of the president-elect's cabinet nominees have for decades fought a flabby intellectual orthodoxy. Yet, while I welcome Trump's attack on a credo which has done much to enfeeble the Western world, I am not blind to the violent economic and financial dislocation which may mark the transition from one reserve currency order to another. At the end of this paper, I offer a modest suggestion for avoiding a scenario which has the potential to morph into a 1930s-style beggar thy neighbor episode on steroids. The starting point is that the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the end of World War II, with 1971 marking the transition to a pure fiat regime. Markets, institutions and investor habits have developed according to this basic building block. Yet there is nothing immutable or inevitable about the US sponsoring such a currency arrangement. Indeed, Trump's core economic platform of trade protection points to the U.S. pursuing an objective which is guaranteed to kill the existence of the U.S. dollar as the sole reserve currency, namely the U.S.'s apparent pursuit of a current account surplus. The double pyramid of credit. To explain my point, I will use Jacques Rueff's powerful framework for thinking about the U.S. dollar's international relationships, namely the double pyramid of credit. Rueff was an economist and senior civil servant who between 1923 and 1969 was France's chief negotiator at international monetary conferences, and a sophisticated observer of the international payments system. Rather like his arch-rival John Maynard Keynes, Rueff was both a theoretician and a practical man of action who was involved in actually building the global financial system. One of his key ideas was that in the post-gold standard era, a side effect of one country controlling the reserve currency would be an end to the zero-sum game of credit expansion associated with an independent specie-based system. Instead, Rueff's double pyramid of credit idea described a new order that would likely be characterized by inflation, over-indebtedness, capital misallocation, and episodic financial crises. By way of a simplified example, Consider a ruffian take on the relationship between the U.S. and Japan under the post-1971 U.S. dollar reserve system. Say the U.S. went through a big credit expansion, causing it to run a large current account deficit with its East Asian trade partner. The corresponding current account surplus in Japan would spur creation of new Japanese bank deposits, and with them a credit expansion. Under the gold exchange standard, such credits in Japan would have been offset by reduced money supply in the U.S. due to the physical transfer of gold from the U.S. to Japan by way of deficit settlement. As a result, the global system of payments was a zero-sum affair, and credit expansion did not, on balance, change over time. This was upended in 1971 when the U.S. stopped settling its current account deficit in gold. Charles V. Gall, on Roof's advice, catalyzed this shift by demanding that the U.S. settle with a physical transfer of gold ingots. Subsequently, U.S. dollars earned by Japanese firms have not been exchanged against gold, but rather redeposited at the Federal Reserve via a process of foreign exchange reserve accumulation. As a result, the U.S. has not faced higher interest rates from its deficit with Japan and by extension from its habitual global current account deficit. It was this ability for credit to keep growing in both the U.S. and its creditor nations that led Roof to coin his double pyramid moniker. In the above example, both Japan and the U.S. were able to sustain credit growth, although the ultimate source for both was excess U.S. money supply. This money creation machine has only properly broken down during periods of high U.S. inflation which have necessitated sustained tightening by the Federal Reserve. Experience has shown that the U.S. Central Bank has kept obsessively focused on consumer price inflation and disregarded events in asset markets. Even if stocks were surging, the dollar exchange rate was plunging and property prices were going stratospheric. The Fed has proven willfully blind to effects from the double pyramid of credit by responding only to U.S. price and growth data. In short, it may be the world's central banker, but the Fed has resolutely only followed U.S. rules. The problem of divergence. The problem with this double expansion of credit is that it tends to compound economic divergence, rather than convergence, which for all its faults was the logic of the old gold exchange standard. Consider the experience of Japan and the U.S. over the last 30 years. The former proved unable to manage twin objectives of limiting yen appreciation and keeping control of its money supply. The upshot was a huge asset bubble in the late 1980s, which turned into a bust from which Japan has never fully recovered. Fast forward to the early 2000s when two new beneficiaries of this double pyramid of credit started to take off. One was China and the other, what we have called platform companies, or firms which outsource much of their production and working capital needs to dispersed supply chains in places such as East Asia, Eastern Europe and Mexico. The rational actions of these two actors, following Roof's double pyramid of credit logic, has resulted in violent asset price cycles. Chinese financial repression led to surging property prices. Oil experienced an epic boom-bust cycle, and U.S. equities have been pumped up on the promise of permanently cheap money. The flip side has been acute deindustrialization in the U.S. as firms have shifted production to China and other low-cost production centers. Put simply, the double pyramid of credit phenomenon hugely exacerbated the hollowing out of the U.S. industrial sector, and so is the proximate cause of Trump's rise to power. Indeed, it is ironic that U.S. automobile firms are making cars in Mexico for sale to U.S. buyers who can't by any normal measure afford to buy them, as they don't have a proper job. Luckily, U.S. auto firms have organized credit lines for their buyers, even though it is obvious that much of this debt will never be repaid. As with the U.S.-Japan relationship, the U.S. automobile ecosystem has been on a trajectory of divergence rather than convergence. The double increase in leverage, both in Mexico and through vendor financing offered by U.S. auto finance firms, has replaced demand that comes from an organic rise in U.S. living standards. The logical end result would be for car production in the U.S. to be eliminated, and displaced workers, given government handouts, so they can buy Mexican-made vehicles from firms that can declare splendid earnings guaranteed by Uncle Sam. I exaggerate for effect, but this example shows that the U.S.'s exorbitant privilege has little to do with free market principles, as it means the U.S. lacks a foreign trade constraint, and can force other countries to accept payment in dollars. Should either of these conditions end, then the credit pyramid would implode. And indeed, for decades commentators have fretted that the rest of the world may one day lose confidence in the U.S. dollar as a store of value, resulting in soaring U.S. interest rates and an economic crash the Japanese, Chinese and a Brazilian supermodel have at different times, all been touted as potential liquidators. I never believed such scare stories so long as the U.S. remained a superpower capable of corralling international respect. What worried me was a situation where the U.S., for domestic political reasons, pulled up the drawbridge and chose to pursue a current account surplus. Such an outcome was always going to be driven by Americans at large concluding that the global production system was being run against their interests. The emergence of Trumponomics. This was the backdrop for the emergence of Trumponomics and the fact that the U.S. apparently wants to challenge China and Germany to become a surplus economy. To this end, U.S. policymakers hope to tax imports at 20% and subsidize exports by a similar amount. That is what many export-focused economies do through VAT systems. Returning to Roof's monetary construct, Trump may just as well have said that he wanted to destroy the double pyramid of credit, which has grown relentlessly outside of the U.S. since the mid-1960s. Whatever the rights and wrongs of the global economic status quo, dismantling such a huge pyramid of credit threatens havoc for the financial system. Should the U.S. return to a current account surplus, the rest of the world will move to an aggregated current account deficit. Since all other countries have a trade constraint, the system will inevitably start to contract, led by those nations already running a current account deficit. Such economies will have to tighten policy almost immediately, resulting in a big decline in domestic demand and so reduced imports. The consequence will be that even surplus economies will move into a current account deficit and be forced into a tightening cycle. Those with an eye for history will have recognized the pattern, as this chain of events was roughly what happened in the 1930s when another big pyramid of external credit collapsed. In this period, Britain was unable to regain its primacy at the center of the old gold standard system, and the U.S. was not willing to assume an economic leadership role. When the U.S. sought the reflationary devaluation of the dollar in 1934 by constraining the sale of gold, it did so despite running a current account surplus. That decision aided the U.S.'s economic recovery, but helped tip the German and French economies into a depression, ensuring the onset of World War II. Fast forward to today, and in some ways the ambition of U.S. policymakers exceeds that of the 1930s. In addition to trade protection measures, Trump wants to ensure that dollars held outside of the U.S., especially those controlled by U.S. multinationals, are sent back home. On the basis that history rhymes rather than being repeated, it is worth recalling that in the 1930s U.S. banks aggressively recalled German loans, leading to the collapse of the German banking system. There is nothing immutable about a dollar standard. It is worth remembering that seemingly fixed elements of the global credit system developed in a haphazard fashion and can easily be reversed. For example, the eurodollar market evolved after 1963 when John F. Kennedy acted to reduce a growing U.S. balance of payments deficit by taxing U.S. investors who took dollars abroad to buy foreign securities. Subsequently, U.S. dollars held outside of the U.S. were mostly taxed at a lower rate than onshore dollars, and it was this arbitrage that allowed the City of London to develop and the external pyramid of credit to grow. If the tax system which encouraged U.S. dollars to stay outside of the U.S. disappears, then the $1.20 TRN or so owned by U.S. multinationals, the backbone of international credit markets, may be about to move back onshore. For the City of London, where most external dollars are managed day to day, the blowback could end up being far more serious than the loss of European Union passporting rights due to Brexit. As a result, the future of international capital flows looks pretty gloomy. Indeed, on a flow basis the U.S. dollar may increasingly become a collector's item. This matters because many countries rely on U.S. dollars being readily available to plug balance of payment deficits. According to a Bank of International Settlements report from 2015, the preceding decade saw non-U.S. entities borrow some $10 TRN. Since the U.S. can seemingly no longer be relied on to play the global shock absorber by expanding its current account deficit, the key headache for emerging economies may become servicing their stock of U.S. dollar debt. So long as U.S. short rates stayed low and the dollar exchange rate did not appreciate unduly, that is the situation since 2008, this was a manageable task. Yet in the event of the U.S. current account starting to improve markedly or even going into surplus, borrowers will find it impossible to repay principal as the U.S. currency will have effectively been cornered, and there will not be enough dollars available to satisfy demand. This situation will be exacerbated if the borrowed dollars were used to build factories whose output is sold in the U.S. The threatened imposition of a 20% surcharge on foreign-made imports to the U.S. will render such factories unprofitable, but the debt will still have to be repaid. In short, the external part of the double pyramid of credit could involve subprime-type write-offs, only much larger. Postscript, a modest proposal to save the world. If somebody were to ask my advice on how President-elect Trump should pursue his perfectly legitimate objectives without wrecking the global economy and thereby ensure failure, I would suggest the following. Small bullet: the U.S. should adopt market-friendly policies that boost the economy's structural growth rate, as is clearly the case with the program being put forward by Trump and the House Republicans. Small bullet: more difficult, but far more important than the first goal. Trump needs to pursue policies for which he was not elected, namely to prevent a collapse in the growth rate outside of the U.S. The transmission mechanism for a bad cycle to unfold will be a far stronger U.S. dollar, the inevitable result of ROIC in the U.S. rising sharply. Such a situation will quickly hurt those fellows detailed above with heavy dollar debts, as they never expected the U.S. to actively reduce ROIC in the rest of the world. Should an acute dollar squeeze develop of a type last seen in the early 1980s, then the exchange rate will soar, and ultimately the U.S. will suffer due to U.S. firms experiencing a sharply lower return on invested capital. For their part, U.S. lenders will face huge defaults by stressed foreign borrowers. To avoid such a scenario, the U.S. should stand ready to buy, outright, the currencies of those countries facing payment difficulties. This will leave the U.S. with huge foreign exchange reserves and the rest of the world with enough dollars to service their debts and meet payment obligations. As such, an implosion of the foreign pyramid of credit need not mean a collapse in the non-U.S. money supply. Put another way, the U.S. authorities should stand ready to build reserves in foreign currencies equivalent to the sum that vanishes through the credit contraction it has engendered. The new U.S. administration should thus launch a strategic fund ready to buy any foreign currency each time it becomes 2 standard deviations undervalued as measured by the OECD. Funding should come from the Federal Reserve at a market rate of interest, and a stipulation should be made that the program is wound up as soon as the new foreign exchange reserves reach a level equal to about 6 months of U.S. imports. The profits that will almost certainly accrue from such a program should be used directly to offset budget deficits that Trump's fiscal expansion is likely to deliver. Thanks for watching.
In the latest stunning development involving a documented failure of a bank to deliver physical gold when demanded, yesterday we reported that according to German website godmode-trader.de, a client of the Xetra Gold exchange traded commodity was told the fund's designated sponsor, Deutsche Bank, would be unable to deliver the requested gold. This was contrary to the explicit reps and warranties made explicitly in the Xetra Gold's prospectus, which said that investors are entitled to the delivery of the certified amount of physical gold at any time, and proudly added that since the introduction of Xetra Gold in 2007, investors have exercised this right 900 times, with a total of 4.5 tons of gold delivered. As the German article concluded, anyone who wants to easily convert their Xetra Gold holdings into physical gold, at least for clients of Deutsche Bank, can do so only by selling their shares, and then buying gold coins or bars directly elsewhere. Which leads the author to the logical question, what is the worth of the Xetra Gold service, which certifies the right to redeem physical gold, if said delivery is no longer possible? In other words, what was supposedly an ETC which promised physical delivery upon demand, is nothing more than yet another paper-only play. We asked another, more nuanced question, is the inability to deliver physical gold an issue with Xetra Gold, or with the company's designated sponsor, Deutsche Bank, and if the latter is suddenly unable to satisfy even the smallest of delivery requests by retail clients, just how pervasive is the global physical gold shortage? Our report has stirred a significant response, both at Deutsche Bank and at Xetra Gold, which today filed an official response, one which can be read. Deutsche Bank on the brink of collapse. Tough times ahead, prepare yourself accordingly. Bad news could spark a sell-off contagion that could lead to another global financial meltdown and a bailout by Angela Merkel's government despite her opposition to German state intervention. Analysts are warning that ultra-high-frequency trades triggered by machines could lead to a perfect storm and could have serious knock-on effects for other banks exposed to the firm's risky assets book. Germany's largest lender has been hit by unprecedented sell-offs, losing 52% of its value in just a year and is struggling to ward off its crisis. The bank has announced massive job cuts ahead of a £11.4 billion fine from the US Justice Department. And it has been mooted that up to 5,000 jobs could go in America alone. Now investors, including their biggest stakeholder Qatar, are said to be on edge as they get set to reveal their latest financial data. Deutsche Bank AG on Thursday posted an unexpected profit and set aside more cash to cover litigation costs amid talks aimed at settling mortgage securities probes with U.S. authorities. Third quarter net income was €278 million, $303.1 million, beating analysts' average expectations for a net loss of around €610 million. That compared with a net loss of €6 billion during the same period last year, driven by billions of dollars in write-downs as part of a company-wide restructuring. In German on the following page. What is notable is that instead of immediately refuting the story as it should have done if there is no breach of prospectus covenants and declaring that any and all physical gold demands have and will be satisfied, Xetra took a very circular approach to responding, one which in effect confirmed our concerns, that the issue was not so much with Xetra, but with the sponsor bank, in this case Deutsche Bank. Gold Bank Investment Commodity Physical Gold Trade Trader Germany Deutsche Bank Vault Gold Vault Frankfurt Account Bank Account Umicore Gram Silver Gold Bullion Silver Coin 999 Gold 999 Silver Savings Account Binary Trading Sell Gold Cash for Gold Buy Gold Asset Rich Wealth Millionaire Billionaire UK London New York Delivery Shipping Elite NWO Agenda Economy News Media Entertainment Future Profit George Soros Jim Rogers Alex Jones Coast to Coast David Icke Exposed Truth Prepared CAD Motograph clients of Germany's biggest bank who have invested in the exchange-traded commodity Xetra Gold are facing problems when they want to obtain physical gold, according to German analytic website godmode-trader.de. Xetra Gold is a bond on the Deutsche Börse commodities market, and Deutsche Bank is a designated sponsor. On the website, Xetra Gold says its clients have the right for physical delivery of gold. Surviving an economic crisis is one thing, thriving and securing your wealth during it is a totally different game. Fortunately, I had already done my research on that. So we put our knowledge together and created an economic disaster survival blueprint for our families that would handle both survival and wealth protection. And we knew we had to warn unsuspecting Americans of what is coming and share this vital knowledge with them. This is how surviving the final bubble was born, a blueprint to surviving and thriving during the coming big bank derivatives collapse.